This is just the sort of thing we need to do. It kind of goes without saying that if South Africa's business community are 100% with it, the core base of what Ramaphosa is trying to do, and he's this core base in the South African Communist Party and the trades unions are not going to be too happy with it. And I think that's his big problem. These provisions that they've talked about, deregulation, cutting down government, the cutting down the bureaucracy, emphasizing services. It sounds very good, but it's very much the sort of corporate speak. And I think one of the elements of Ramaphosa's character that Crystal brought out in her superb piece in the coming quarterly edition of Africa Report was this idea that he's the first guy who said, I'm CEO of South Africa. Now, that goes down very well with the business community, far less well with the trades unions and the communists, who don't really want a CEO. They want a visionary. They want a political guy from the grassroots, as Ramaphosa was, who's on their side. And I think that's the balance. I think on the international side, I think he must be a little disappointed, to be honest, because the overseas bankers were not exactly cock-a-hoop about Mbwene's budget. I mean, what they said was Mbwene knows what he's doing. These guys are clearly competent. I think one of them said fiscally learned, economically highly skilled team with the Reserve Bank governor, Mbwene, and then people like Trevor Manuel and Maria Ramos in the wings. These are old friends of Ramaphosa. So that economic team, no one doubts that it's got the wherewithal to do this. The question is, where it's going to leave the politics. So I think he's really getting stretched between his own political base, which actually he's got his presidential campaign started in 2017, the trades unions and the Communist Party and the grassroots and the old civics and so on, who got in behind him as an alternative to Zuma. But then, the internationals who are part of, this target. He's talking about trying to raise $100 billion for investment. And they're saying, well, we're not convinced yet. So I think the difficulty is, how is he going to get past the finish line of the election without sort of like making those tough choices? And my suspicion is he's just going to postpone the really tough policy decisions till after the election.
Yes, no, that's absolutely correct, Patrick, because he is between a rock and a hard place. Because at the moment, if we look, for instance, say Eskom as a potential case study of how he's managing it, on the one hand, he tells us we need to break up Eskom. We don't use the P word because it's almost like a terrible swear word, privatization. So they try to cushion it with different language, but essentially that's what it is. We were told by Trevor Manuel, this is the albatross around 55 million South Africans' neck in terms of we don't have a choice but to bail out Eskom. Then we have these massive, for the consumers today, there's anger in South Africa because, again, the increase that we're going to have to pay for electricity. Apart from that, we are bailing out Eskom, and then we hear on a daily basis and inundated with the extent of the corruption that has taken place at Eskom. And so here we see Cyril, and on a day-to-day basis, I get COSATU and I get the National Union of Mine Workers, I get their statements, and the language being used is one of anger, and so, Eskom, COSATU's, for instance, latest statement on tariff hikes, say the words denounces the decision, and Eskom, should first develop a coherent strategy and model before we hand over money to them. And this is, COSATU's words that they use. And again, they have come out to say, well, we were the first ones to come out and support Cyril during his campaign as ANC president, but our support during the election is we're not just handing him a blank check. But, that's what they then tell their members. But when we see they're all together, then, COSATU sort of backtracks that, they will support Cyril, and they're engaging because they want to have a seat at the table. And quite frankly, I think, Cyril is going to have to make the very difficult decisions after May the 8th in terms of, what's going to happen with ESCOM, what's going to happen with, all the money at some of the other state-owned enterprises like SAA. And, the massive expenditure of government workers, the size of government, smaller, leaner cabinet. And we already hear from, his sort of his people and his advisors that there's going to be absolutely no choice, that there's going to be some real cuts that we're going to see when he's inaugurated and when he addresses us here at Parliament here in Cape Town sometime in May.
But Crystal, do you think then that we are perhaps moving into a new era of politics in South Africa? I mean, this will be, let's presume that Cyril and his team win in May. It's not an out there assumption. The ANC have 60%, but then after that, you have a pretty new crowd, in a sense. They are the exiles compared to the exiles, and that is, for anyone not in South Africa, the exiles were the people who fought against apartheid from the inside, as opposed to the people who sort of who went on and fought from Zambia or went to Moscow or went to Algeria or what have you, and there is a sense that there's a different worldview. They're not in this the old 20th century fight between capitalism and socialism. They're miles beyond that. But South Africa today, the ANC, it needs COSATU, a trades union, to fight for it. Electorally, in the UK, the Labour Party split from the trade unions in the 1990s. Do you think this monolithic structure where you have, a tripartite alliance of the ANC, the South African Communist Party, and COSATU, the Trades Unions Alliance, that is really going to shatter? And then might we see, maybe this is too early to talk about this, but slowly we might see coming into view a new political realignment, maybe new parties forming, maybe the ANC even splitting, 5-10 years down the line?
I wish I had a crystal ball to give you, some accurate answer, but I don't think, because I think South Africa's politics is too fluid to ever have an accurate answer to its politics. I think, I think Cyril Ramaphosa is trying very hard to keep the ANC and its broad coalition together. And, despite the rumblings within the ruling party, he is trying to balance and find a fine line to ensure that he keeps this family together. And so, it's the same with the different unions. He's able to dispatch his key people to have discussions with the Labour Federation and also the National Union of Mine Workers, for instance, because, of course, he was one of the founding fathers of that trade union movement. And I think what's quite interesting, Nick, when one engages with these trade union, activists, because of course they are very critical of if Ramaphosa announces anything related to the P word of privatization. But when you get them one-on-one and you just speak to them about different issues, they will be the first to acknowledge that, Cyril Ramaphosa needs our support. So our public posturing would be critical, but when we actually sit behind closed doors, we will support him unconditionally, because Cyril Ramaphosa is the man that South Africa needs right now. He is the right man for this moment. And there's some pretty hard decisions that has to be made. And Cyril Ramaphosa is that man to do it. So they will publicly say, well, our support, the for him is not. He can't just assume it will be his, because they have to also appease the different factions within their, broad coalition of the trade union movement. But when they sit and look at each other eye to eye, their posturing is very different. And I think so that is one element that we see. I do think historically we've seen with political parties, new political movements that, are formed post the period of, having, a fallout with the ANC. And here we have to obviously refer to the Congress of the People, COPE, because that was a political party formed after the, sort of rather embarrassing defeat of Thabo Mbeki. We have seen electorally that their fortunes have been on the decrease. They will therefore be lucky to return to Parliament, despite how right-wing their leader, Musia Lakota, has become. So I think that's one issue that our history, our young democratic political history has shown, that these new political formations don't last too long on the political landscape. However, I can be challenged by you if after the 8th of May, the economic freedom fighters increases their electoral support, because of course, Julius Malema, also leaving the ANC in complete anger, was able to get more than 1 million votes and get that 6% national vote to be able to have several members of parliament and really making an impact on the politics of South Africa. And I think that is what we're all waiting to see. Can a political party born out of the ANC essentially actually increase their vote? And I think that's when we'll be able to make a sort of broader analysis in terms of, does it mean the ANC's eventually on, in terms of the electoral support, is on the decrease. Mm-hmm. Because, of course, we do know, if we look at other liberation movements within the Southern African context, we see it's that 20-year anniversary where we see a decrease of support. And we saw that in Zambia, of course, with, the ruling party breaking up essentially. We see, obviously, in Mozambique, party still, ruling party and liberation party still, getting a substantial support. Similarly, in Angola, I think, of course, Zimbabwe is another case altogether. But we are watching the ANC because it is Africa's oldest liberation movement. And when you speak to ANC activists, they are proud of that, and they want that to remain one of those historical facts, that the African National Congress in South Africa remains Africa's oldest liberation movement, and they will do whatever they need to do to get that together. And I think it's always interesting, Nick, during an election campaign, how we see the ANC put their differences aside and go campaigning. And I think it's always fascinating to watch how former enemies become, best of friends, dancing together on stage, going door to door, how, they will put their differences aside to ensure that the ANC wins, an overwhelming victory. But of course, senior ANC people do admit, they will be happy with 55%.
The latest polls, Crystal, say 61%?
Yes, the Institute of Race Relations poll.
I mean, do you think that's, is that an accurate reflection of what you're hearing on the ground? But also, from what you're saying, there's a sort of bringing together of the various factions of the party. We've got to win this. We've got to win big on the 8th of May. And so would it be fair to say, since the ANC, the very fraught ANC leadership elections in December 2017, and today, the party is in better shape under Ramaphosa? There's obviously still a lot of people who backed Jacob Zuma and backed his former wife's bid for the leadership. But overall, the party is in better shape and has wider, stronger support across the country than it did in the sort of the dog days of Jacob Zuma's presidency.
Yes, and firstly, if we look at under Jacob Zuma's rule, for the past 10 years, there was, the ANC's electoral support declined and even falling below 50%. And we know in that 2016 municipal elections what happened to the key metropolitan areas in South Africa, Johannesburg, Tshwane, and Port Elizabeth. But I do think that since Cyril Ramaphosa